And so if that ever comes up for you, or if you're hearing it now and you can relate to it and you go, oh my God, that totally happens to me.
Broadcasting from Boston, Massachusetts, you're listening to the Technology Equals Equality podcast.
Welcome back to the Technology Equals Equality podcast. I'm your host, Lori Brooks, and this is episode 74. I am very pleased to welcome public speaker, author, and coach Mary Sheen back to the show. Mary originally joined us for episode 71 to discuss the pink elephant in the room that public speakers don't speak about. This week, Mary is back to show you how you can begin silencing your inner critic too. Mary, welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us again today.
Thank you, Lori. I am so excited to be back on.
As am I to have you back on. You are a ginormous part of this journey of mine over here at this point, Mary. For my listeners' sake, if you didn't get that chance to check out that episode, as I mentioned a moment ago, you should check it out, because I have shared that I did have the opportunity to read Mary's book, and I am super excited about my own public speaking journey, as I have just before we started recording this episode, enrolled in Mary's upcoming boot camp in December. So, Mary, I'd love for you to tell us, a little bit more about the boot camp as we kind of get into this episode a little bit further. But what I'd like to kind of do is take it back to what we were touching base on as I was registering, was kind of that fear that I was dealing with, taking that next step in my own journey, because I'm positive that it's a fear and a feeling that a lot of entrepreneurs come across, that hesitation of investing in themselves or taking that next step on their journey or getting on a stage or hosting that webinar. There's that pops up that makes you hesitate. So I was sharing with you the reframe and what I was working on myself. And I'm just curious, what have you found to be the most common fear that you've come across with clients?
Great question. Wonderful, wonderful question. There are many different fears that we have as human beings, when we step outside our comfort zone. Okay, I think your listeners are probably like-minded, like you and I, so they've probably heard that by now. But how I want to break that down and unpack it for people so that there's a more nuanced understanding of how to combat your own fears when they come up is always work on noticing what your internal dialogue is, all right? Because thoughts lead to emotion and how you feel. So paying attention to how you feel when the fears come up, and then asking yourself, what is actually causing this fear, right? And so one of the most common fears is, to answer your question more directly, is in terms of public speaking especially, is I don't want to look stupid. Or something around that genre, that theme of stupidity, right? So I don't want to feel stupid. I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to appear stupid. And that is one of the most common underlying themes of why people avoid public speaking. Or when they do somehow have to do it or feel like they need to do it, that fear is there with them as they open their mouths for the first time on the stage, behind the scenes. So it's not like you're consciously thinking, I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to look stupid. It's a subconscious fear that's lurking just behind it, so that just behind the surface on the periphery. And that's why there's this more obvious fear around, well, I got to be perfect. I hope I prepare enough. I hope I don't say anything that's going to discredit myself. And very closely related to that fear is what I've noticed with the clients and people that I work with. And, as you know, you've read my book. I talk about it at length in my book, is this fear of being found out, okay? So what that means is the impostor syndrome. You may have heard of this. Many people have not, right? But there's this common concept out there called the impostor syndrome. And I can tell you, and so what that means is, on a very high level, is whatever you're doing, whatever the value you're providing to the audience, or however you show up to help the audience, there's this feeling in the background of, I'm just faking it. I'm really a, X, Y, or Z, whatever you're doing in life, whoever you're representing. I'm not really that. I'm not really an expert on this topic. And so that becomes a fear in itself of being found out, okay? So first of all, that is a very common thing that happens for people. And so if that ever comes up for you, or if you're hearing it now and you can relate to it and you go, oh my God, that totally happens to me, then just first of all know that it's normal, that it comes up for many, many people, just the fact that you're a human being. And the fact that you are stepping outside your comfort zone, whatever that looks like for you, that will come up, or a similar fear will come up, because the fact that it's the mere fact that you are outside your comfort zone, there's this part of your brain that kicks in that tries to keep you safe, right? That keep you safe. Don't go outside your comfort zone. There's this perceived threat that something's going to happen to you. So this fear is not something that you want to suppress or wish that it wasn't there, or there's something wrong with you because the fear is there. No, the idea is to notice it when it comes up, and it's normal, and then to proceed in the direction that you choose, because you're growing and you want to take next steps in this direction, whether it's contributing more or stepping up your game, whatever that looks like for you. And in public speaking, it usually means speaking outside of your comfort zone. So in other words, if you were used to, say, speaking in front of a group of 5 to 10 people about a topic that you're very, very familiar with, so your next level of comfort zone might be speaking in front of 50 to 100 people in a new topic, right? A topic that you want to contribute, but you're not very practiced in giving that topic. And so that is by nature outside your comfort zone, because it's something new, right? So at any time you endeavor in presenting something new or stepping outside your comfort zone in any kind of sense, whether it's a new skill you're learning, or you're endeavoring to have your own business now for the first time, or creating a new area of business you haven't created before, anything like that that's outside your comfort zone. The idea is notice when the fear comes up, and because for sure that's the direction you want to travel, you want to notice that internal dialogue and the fear, and then moving forward despite of that fear. That is the trick, my friend, and that is worth, if you can do that, and you can do that consistently, and internally coach yourself to not let the fear stop you from taking the action, that is the holy grail right there.
Definitely. It's about making sure that you take the actions. Whenever that fear or that hesitation is felt, I tend to notice or recognize in myself that there's something that I need to follow through with. There's something that I need to move forward with. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to go about recognizing or noticing. Do you find that there are more female clients versus male clients? Do you think that there's a difference in the way females versus males approach this sort of hesitation or the fear?
That's a great question. And I think it's both. I think there are commonalities and there are slight differences as well. The commonality being the baseline is whether you're male or female, we have one thing in common, and that is that we're all humans, right? Mm-hmm. So as human beings, we definitely share the same mechanics of how when we're endeavoring to do something new, learn something new, there's always going to be those awkward moments at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And, that in itself is a commonality between men and women. Now, if I had to separate them, and I talk a little bit about this in my book, about the differences between men and women, especially when it comes to dealing with public speaking, is there are some biological differences between men and women. And the way I describe it in the book is, for men, the primary chemistry, I guess, is dominated by testosterone, right? There's this dark side, quote unquote, dark side of testosterone is violence. When there's too much of it, there happens to be the violence, right? Mm-hmm. For women, we're wired differently just by nature, and our predominant chemical is estrogen, right? The way women socially bond traditionally is through nurturing each other, right? The nature of nurturing each other, and then the dark side, quote unquote, again, the dark side of how females function is the the tendency to exclude. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so for example, and this is this is not me creating this. It's very well known. This is the phenomenon that you would see in movies or in books. Like there's this movie, for example, Mean Girls, and there's plenty other examples like that, and a book called Queen Bees and Wannabes, right? It's a very well-known phenomenon, and women, as we grow up, maybe when we get to the tween years, the teenage years, we experience this in the peer pressure where it's the exclusion happens in the form of, well, she's my friend, not your friend, right? And so there's this exclusion that happens. And so because we're wired that way, there's this tendency for women to have the predisposition to want to be liked.
Yes.
And so what that means, wanting to be liked, the opposite of that is not wanting to be ousted, right? Not wanting to be rejected. And I'm sure, Laurie, if you were to ask any of your female listeners, they either have experienced it themselves somewhere along their growing up journey, or they know of somebody close to them who's experienced being ousted, right? And I myself have as well, many times. In fact, I was sharing this story with one of my friends. In the 5th grade, I was dumped by my best friend, okay? And that, if you've ever experienced it, it's not a pleasant feeling. And so there's this tendency now to unconsciously want to be liked, right? Not wanting to be disliked. And so the way it manifests in public speaking, for example, is being consciously aware that you're not there on the stage to be liked. I mean, it's my preference to be liked, and it's great if you're in my audience and whatever I say resonates with you, and you go, "Oh, I like her. That's great. That is my preference." But the purpose, my primary purpose of being on the stage is not for you to like me, because I will say things that will probably wake you up in some way, maybe even a little controversial, maybe to, trigger you deliberately so that I can wake you up to these insights or concepts that I'm trying to share with you. And so if my primary concern while I'm on the stage is to be liked, then that's going to hold back my expression, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and not to say that men don't have that. Men, as human beings, also, would like to be liked as well. Nobody, I don't think, ever consciously just gets up there just not to be liked. But yeah, that is a slight difference in the way we're wired as men and women. And in my experience, I've worked with both men and women. The men also have a similar, and I want to emphasize this point because I think it's important, also have as human beings, the fear of being rejected as well, even if it's more unconscious, subconscious than the women. Mm-hmm. However, they're not as, what I've noticed in the people that I work with, they're not necessarily as open about sharing those fears, right? Mm. But once it's put on the table, once it's out there in the open, then you say, "Oh yeah, I have that too," and yes, I have that too. So I think it is women are more susceptible to it, but men are definitely not exempt from it. In fact, probably equally subjected to the same phenomenon, but not as boisterous about it.
Gotcha. It's just that it's not as commonly discussed or as commonly recognized. So that perception, right, that recognition of it may not be as available as it is to those who are looking or consciously aware of their intent or interest in the statement, as you said, the need to be liked.
Right. Yeah, there's this perception. I need to look up his name, but there's this author, Seeker, who talks about this at length. And I learned from him through his experiences that the way men grow up is more of a, if you were to share your feelings with somebody, like in your male bonding group, then there's a high chance that it could be perceived as a weakness, you see. And right. So that's why many men don't share and end up bottling it up. And, in many ways, it's going to manifest, the quirks are going to manifest differently, right? An author about that side of things too, men, which I can't speak to because I'm not one.
Well, no, that's wonderful. What we'll do is we will put a link to either his YouTube channel or his website along with the info about the boot camp on the show notes page for the listeners and links so that they can check them out. Thank you for sharing that. I know fear was a really big player during your journey as an entrepreneur and becoming a speaker. But I'm curious about whether or not you feel like fear was also the biggest player when launching your own coaching firm, so Magnetic Podium. What do you feel was the difference between the two, and what if there was a difference?
That is a great question. I think fear is a part of everyday life, and fear is a part of the commonality that we experience as human beings. So it will be pervasive, whether it was me learning to be a better speaker or me launching my own business. That definitely is a commonality that I do have to get through in order to continue launching the business. And so it's a training and communications company with a coaching side of it as well, one-on-one coaching. And how I now describe it is it's transformational public speaking. So in other words, it's not necessarily addressing its core purpose is not to address just the mechanics of speaking, because I started to notice that in the public speaking training education world out there, and I myself through my journey have taken many, many, many public speaking courses and training courses. And the gap that I perceived when I started teaching public speaking back in 2009, it became very obvious to me that people's number one obstacle that got in their way of becoming the best, most self-expressed speaker that they can be, what held them back wasn't the mechanics, which is what was being taught. So what I mean by mechanics is things like, how do you stand? How do you use your voice? How do you structure a speech? What is the message? All of that is important, but what was not being addressed was pink elephant in the room, so to speak, which is the inner critic, yourself, right? So when I was creating courses and writing my book about that whole process of what I teach to how to conquer your own inner critic, it became very readily apparent to me that if I'm not myself constantly and consistently working on my own inner critic and being able to identify it when it comes up and proceeding despite of it, then I have no credibility teaching it. Okay. Exactly. So as I was launching my company around this concept and around what I teach, that is also something that I was watching, right? What is my own inner critic saying right now as I'm endeavoring to launch this business, as I'm building out the next components of my business, and even in writing the book, this all came up. So it's fascinating that you asked this question, because the fear doesn't always manifest itself as a fear. Right. A lot of the times, actually, it doesn't manifest as an obvious fear. Like you're not literally sitting there going, "I'm scared right now."
Right.
It doesn't manifest that way. How it sometimes and often does manifest is noticing there's this internal resistance that happens. Right. Stephen Pressfield, who's a very well-known author, he talks about this as well, and it's the equal and opposite. It's almost like there's two opposing forces that's happening within us. So one is we want to survive, right? As human beings, obviously we don't want to die. We want to survive. So that's one force. And then the opposite force is we also want to grow. Right. We want to grow as human beings. We want to evolve as human beings. And what does that mean? That means we have to step outside our comfort zone. So these two equal and opposite forces are happening at the same time. So I want to grow. Yeah, I want to grow. And then you step outside your comfort zone. You're like, oh, no, I need to survive. I need to get back into my comfort zone. So these two opposite forces are always working against each other. And it's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a neutral thing to notice and understand within ourselves, because how it manifests on a daily basis is, for example, if you are, let's say, building out a new component to your business, you've never done it before, or you're working on a new speech, a new presentation that you've never given before, and how it comes across inside, how the dialogue, if you were to notice within yourself, might be something like, oh, I really don't want to do this right now. I don't feel like it. Oh, it's such a hard work. I'm never going to get this finished, right? So that in itself is putting dialogue into what that feeling is, right? That feeling is always, oh, I don't want to do it, and I don't feel like it. I'm sure all of your listeners can relate to that and be like, that feeling of hard work, that push, the resistance of getting into motion. You got to really set yourself on this path of passing your own inertia, right? Like getting past that initial inertia.
Yes, exactly. Having that positive mindset, having that,
and so
that momentum.
Why I'm saying that in relation to your question is the fear doesn't always necessarily come across as recognizable scariness. It's a lot of the times it's internal resistance, right? So yeah, absolutely. In everything I do, when it's new, whether it was creating my business or launching a new part of business, that comes up. That internal resistance comes up. And so, yeah, absolutely. Knowing and using the same processes that I teach my clients to get over those internal resistance is what I'm about and what I love to share with people because they work. When I'm doing them, they work. When I'm not doing them, guess what? It doesn't work.
No, I agree. They do work. Once you address it, take that recognition of it, and then address it in some way, shape, or form, you will see differences. Mindset is one of the largest hurdles that most people tend to face during their journey. I'm curious whether or not you find there to be some sort of recurring language or specific phrases that people tend to use when you're working with clients. So in other words, throughout your client base, do you find that there's a resounding fear that everyone tends to have?
Lori, that's a great question, and here's how I'm going to answer that. I'll give you an example. I think that's a really good way of illustrating it. When I was writing my book, all right, and it's a process to write a book, and anyone who's written their book will know this. It takes a lot of a discipline to be able to finish the book, right? It's one thing. I think the statistic is, I forget the exact number, but it's really high number. It's like 90-something% of people want to write a book or one day would love to write a book, but yet the percentage of people that actually do and publish the book is very small. And I believe it's due to this phenomenon is having the tools to deal with your own internal resistance around doing something and following through with something. So how I dealt it during the book writing process, and I think this is a process that anyone can take to use around anything, whether it's writing a book or learning something new, is to have what I call a practice around debunking, firstly noticing what the little voices are that's coming up, the internal resistant voices, and then a way to get you out of it, to take action anyway. Because it sounds like very theoretical, right? So here's how I implement it on a practical basis, all right? Take any piece of paper or even a Word document, which is what I use during my writing process. As a very specific example, I would make myself sit there every single weekday morning between, it was like 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. I'm going to spend 1 hour writing a part of this book, all right? And so I would sit there and start noticing those internal resistant voices that come up. And each one that came up, I would literally go to my Word document and type it out in bullet points. I won't get this done on time. There's so much writing. I'm never going to finish it. There's such a long way to go, right? I won't be able to do it. Like whatever it is, I didn't make them wrong. I allowed them to come up, and all I did was document them and just type. Okay, that's what's there right now. Type. So in the middle of the Word document, I would draw a line. On the other side of the document, next to the bullet points that I had just listed, it would be, what would my best friend say to me? What are the empowering voices that my best friend would say to me if I went to her with this concern? So, for example, I won't get it done on time. There's not enough. There's so much writing. I'll never finish it. If I took this concern to my best friend, she would say, and I literally wrote this down in bullet points, you're making progress. Rome wasn't built in a day. Anything worth writing is worth spending time on. Focus on baby steps, moving forward. And then once I got all that out, I was like, oh, my state of mind literally shifted from I can't do this, I can't do this. Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. Oh, yeah, that's so true. And then I would switch back to the other page and start writing.
I love it.
So Yeah, so that is a very simple methodology that you and your listeners can use to get yourself out of that loop, that little loop that tends to we sit in, like a little cul-de-sac that we sit in and stew in and not be able to take action. You see what I'm saying? It's a very practical way of doing it. And so what I ended up doing at the end of let's see, how long did it take me to write the book until it was ready for editing? Probably 6 months, right? Approximately 6 months until I finished the first draft of the book, or until it was ready for a professional editor to look at, right? Mm-hmm. And so during the 6 months, as you can imagine, that Word document of the inner little voice, internal resistance voice versus the best friend voice, that document became very, very long, right? And because even if the same voice came up from yesterday, from the day before, I didn't care. I didn't look at it and go, oh, it's a duplicate voice, so I shouldn't write it down. No, I wrote it down anyway. So at the end of that 6-month process, right, this is where my nerdiness comes across, because I'm constantly trying to figure out tools and processes of how I can get over conquer my own internal resistance so that I can create what I need to contribute into the world. And I know that I am the biggest hurdle and my own biggest barrier of what I can produce, like the ideas that I have versus them being manifested physically out into the world, the biggest barrier. And so I am determined to figure out how to conquer my own inner resistance when it comes up. So this long Word document that I ended up having as a result of writing down my little voices and best friends' voices every single day of my writing, I went through it meticulously and categorized all of the little voices, okay? And then here's what I found. I found 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 categories. The 5 categories that I noticed the inner critic voices were in the form of, if I had to put them under umbrellas, they would be grouped this way. The first category out of the 5 is overwhelm. You feel very overwhelmed. So the example, to answer your question, the example common little voices that would come up as a part of feeling overwhelmed is, I won't get this done on time. There's so much to do. What if I don't finish it? There's such a long way to go. I'll never finish it. So that's overwhelm. Mm-hmm. I'll never get this done, right? That's overwhelm. The second category is it's too hard. It's too difficult. The challenge is too great. So how it manifests is the little voice saying, the internal dialogue saying, I won't be able to do it. I can't do it. I don't know how. I just can't. It's too hard, right? That's the second category. The third category is that the internal dialogue attacks your own credibility, okay? So as an example, the internal dialogue might sound like this. Oh, my God, what if I say this is all BS? All what I'm saying is BS. It's not good enough. My writing is not good enough, or whatever it is you're working on. It's not good enough. This is BS. No one's ever going to pay attention to this. What value do I have to bring to the world? This is nonsense, right? So noticing that third category, if it's attacking your own credibility, okay. And again, I would like to ask you and your listeners to see if you can relate to this, and I'm pretty sure you can. The fourth category is the resistance to the work itself, okay. So what that would sound like an internal dialogue would be, I don't feel like it. I don't feel like doing the work right now. I don't really feel like it. Do I have to do it? Oh, I just want to go out and have fun. I just want to watch TV. I just want to have chocolate. I just want to whatever, X, fill in the blank. I just want to X, Y, Z. I don't want to do it right now. So that's the resistance to the work itself, okay? Mm-hmm. And then the last category is similar to attacking your own credibility, but a little bit more sharp, a little bit more deep, which is attacking your own self-worth. Yeah. So it's like, what's wrong with me? No one else seems to be struggling like I am. Why am I the only one who found it hard? How finds this hard? What's wrong with me? Oh my God, like what's wrong? So it's literally attacking your self-worth. Right. So this is from lots and lots of examples of the data, and I've shared this with many people since, and every person I've shared it with can relate to most, if not all, of these categories, right?
Right.
And so the idea, to answer your question in a very, very long format, is absolutely there are common inner critic internal voices that come up all the time related to our fear, related to our internal resistance. And if you can relate to any of that, know that you are not the only one. It's a human thing.
I love it. No, you're not the only one. And I love those 5 categories that you provided. The overwhelm, it's too hard, not good enough, resistance, and so forth. They're definitely all very relatable categories that, I'm sure entrepreneurs across the board experience in one way, shape, or form. I think what I thought was most impressive about what you were stating just now, and I kind of want to rewind to your expressing, while you were writing the book, how you just kept moving forward by using the journal, by using that document, by creating the momentum with it, not even to look back to see if you've written that before or debating on how many times you've written this little voice down. It didn't matter. The point was to get it out. To get it out and keep the momentum flowing. So I just wanted to kind of bring us back to that because I thought that was really important. And kudos and congrats once again on the book. I absolutely loved it and can't wait to get to the boot camp. Mary, I'd love for you to share, once again, a little bit about what the boot camp will be like, what you're planning to share there. I'd like for you to also share your motivation, why it is that you do what you do and why it is you're so excited to host this upcoming boot camp.
It's a great question. Thank you for asking. So I have a 2-day boot camp. It's a public speaking boot camp here in the Boston area that I'll be holding. It's on December the 9th and 10th. It's a Saturday and Sunday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So you get 2 full days of immersion. If you liked what you heard already on the podcast, that is just a fraction of some of the things that I covered in the boot camp. So day 1 of the boot camp, we spend a lot of time on the inner self. So your internal dialogue of what's holding you back and what's keeping you from owning your full self-expression as a public speaker. And so day 1, we spend a lot of time working on that, looking at you and looking at the processes and guiding you through the processes. And there's a lot of coaching that I do with you as well, so that we can have you have a transformational experience around public speaking. And day 1 is what I was talking about earlier before, how most public speaking trainings are missing. Nobody talks about how do you address the internal dialogue that comes up that disempowers you during public speaking or even in preparation for a presentation, right? So that we address in detail on day 1. Day 2 of the boot camp is more to do with the mechanics. However, it's more than just the regular mechanics you hear about. We dive into engaging storytelling. How do you get your point across in the form of a story so that you get the point across without boring people, keep them engaged, and they feel entertained? So the idea is having edutainment, which is a combination of education and entertainment. The more fun your audience has, the more fun you have, the better they're going to remember the content, the more it's going to sink in anyway. So we look into that. We also look at the human psychology of how to influence people and how we can, as presenters, use that so that we can influence our audience to action. So we dive a lot into that on day 2. And why is it 2 days in a row? Because then it gives you the immersive experience. And you are there for my goal, my intention is giving you a transformational experience, not just of public speaking, but your own relationship to yourself and how you relate to public speaking, so that when you come out of it, you'll never think of public speaking the same way again. Okay, so the idea is to empower you and give you the tools necessary to send you on your way to become an amazing speaker. And to answer your second question, why do I do what I do? That's a great question, because I think we should all start with the why. And when I look at my why as to why I'm doing the business, this is actually just one step of the larger vision that I have. Public speaking is definitely a huge component of that. And that's where my own credibility lies in terms of having conquered my own fear of public speaking and now putting it out into the world in a bigger way than I have been in the previous years of my life, such as putting that book out, such as these boot camps, such as doing many more podcast interviews and getting the word out about your inner critic and how we all have the common fears and all have that internal negative dialogue, to separate ourselves from it, because one big part of the solution is to notice it and then to distinguish it so that there's space between you and that negative internal dialogue, and within that space then you can choose, right? I feel like this is a fundamental skill that is not taught in schools. It's a fundamental skill that's not taught in many families. I certainly did not learn it from my parents. And it was a skill that I had to learn because I was dealing with these difficulties in everyday life, which I needed to have tools to be able to deal with it and move forward and contribute to the world what I'm here to contribute. And I feel like it's a right for everyone to know how to do this for themselves. And I feel very strongly that I was put on this planet to help contribute in that way, to teach and to educate people on how to empower themselves. So this public speaking component is a huge part of that. Going forward, for example, I'm working on my third book, which is just a way of writing and speaking. These are just mediums, right? Mediums for what? Mediums to communicate a message. So what is the message, right? The message is, and what I'm working on now in creating and putting out into the world on a larger scale, is how to process your own emotions so that you can process them in an empowering way and in a healthy way that brings you out to bring whatever your gifts are into the world in a bigger way. And I feel like this is my passion. It's my calling, even though it sounds really glamorous, right? Oh, it's my calling. It really is in some ways, it's almost a burden, right? Yeah. Because it's great when the motivation's there, like, yeah, I'm totally going to bring this out into the world. Yeah, I'm totally going to do that. But then once the motivation leaves, as it always does, because it comes in waves, when you're at the bottom of that motivation curve, now it appears like, oh, now I've got to do this thing, right? Again, going back to those internal resistance voices. So noticing that and still bringing it out into the world, because I'm so clear for myself. It's an inner, internal, intuitive knowing that this is what I'm meant to do right now. And bringing that out into the world is what keeps me going, because, you know, I look at my clients, I look at the people that I work with that takes what I teach them, takes the processes that I teach them, that I guide them through, and totally owning it and totally embracing it as their own, and then seeing the results that they produce in their world, in their lives. That's what keeps me going, because ultimately it's not about me. I'm just a medium through which this message is coming through, and when I can see the results that my clients produce for themselves, that's what makes it rewarding for me. That's what keeps me going and motivated.
It's really important to be able to see the changes that you're capable of creating in others in order to keep that momentum going, but having the ability to reframe and deal with the personal internal dialogue and those pieces for yourself and watching those changes occur for others. I think it's something that probably really does help you in terms of that momentum and moving forward, the ability to witness those changes. If you could wave this magic wand and rid everyone of their inner critic, what do you think the impact would be for the public speaking industry as a whole?
Great. I feel like there are so many gifts that we have, like yourself as well as the listeners. And many people even know what those potential gifts are that they have to offer to the world. And then to bring that out into the physical world and manifesting that in ways that other people can use, or in ways that contribute value to the community, to the world, to people outside of themselves. Whatever those gifts are, then those are just going to be manifested. I had this one mentor that used to say, I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember the exact phrase, but it's something along the lines of, what is the richest place in the world? Is it the mines in Africa, where the diamonds are? No. Is it where the gold is? No. The richest place in the world is cemeteries. And the reason he mentions that is because he says, how many books were not written? How many songs were not composed? How many businesses that could provide value were never created because the people were in their own way and didn't know how to get out of their way, and so those books were not written, that song was not written. So all of the resources, all of the things that we could as individuals bring out into the world do not get put out simply because we either didn't know how to get our own ways, or that inner critic was so prominent we didn't have processes to get around it, and so your gifts weren't shared with the world, right? And so with that magic wand, if everybody could just get rid of their inner critic and or at least know how to get around it so it doesn't stop them anymore, the world would look like a very, very different place. I was reading recently that I forget the exact percentage, but it was a very, very high percentage of how many people who are employees in the corporate world are dissatisfied and disengaged with their own jobs. They're there for the paycheck. They're there just for the, to make a living, and they're not living their dreams. Whether the dream is a business or not, right? The inner critic will get in the way of you manifesting that. So I think that by not allowing the inner critic to get in the way, will then give you the space to be able to pursue those things that you feel are important in the world and you feel that make you happy, the things that bring you joy, that bring you bliss. And if you can now transmogrify that or project that out into the future, if everybody was to be able to do that, what a different world it would be.
I bet it would. Just to bring it back, as you were paraphrasing the richest place in the world and how much value has been missed. I think it's definitely something that everyone, be it someone who is interested in an entrepreneurial journey, or those of you who are just listening because you're just interested in the show, you're not interested in an entrepreneurial journey, but you're thinking about moving forward with something else in life. The inner critic is something that comes up for all of us, no matter what kind of a journey we're on, be it entrepreneurial or not. So I can only imagine what it would be like if. So, Mary, you've been absolutely wonderful. I love having you on the show. I love chit-chatting with you. Please share the best way for our listeners to find you.
Thank you so much. I enjoy being on the show. It's such a pleasure to talk. Sometimes I forget there might even be listeners because it's like it just feels like a conversation between you and I, which is a testament to what a good host you are. So I want to acknowledge you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. So my website is www.magneticpodium.com. Magnetic Podium is one word. And one of the best ways to get in touch with me, I would suggest, is when you go to my website, magneticpodium.com, in the upper right-hand corner of the menu, if you hover over Contact, there's a contact form which you can fill out in text, or you can click on Schedule a Call with Mary. And then you can schedule a complimentary short call, 15 to 30-minute call, to see if there is a way that I can help you. I would love to learn about, what your challenges are, what your goals are, whether it's around public speaking or just getting more clarity in general. Some of the things we spoke about on the podcast, if it resonates with you, I would love to see if there's any way that I can help you.
We will be sure to link to magneticpodium.com, and we will be sure to link to the specific page to sign up for the book, so that if you, in fact, didn't get a chance to check that link out during the last episode, we will be sure that that link is there. Present Yourself in Public Speaking, and also a link to contact, a link to the direct contact page to contact you. So get in touch. If you're interested in the boot camp that is coming up December 9th and 10th, Saturday and Sunday, I will be there with Mary for this boot camp. So we look forward to seeing all of you there. Mary, thank you again, and I look forward to hanging out soon.
Thanks, Laurie. I'm so excited to see you in December as well. Thanks for having me.
Mary, thank you once again for joining us this week. I am super excited about joining you for your 2-day Present Yourself in Public Speaking Bootcamp this weekend. Techie community, thank you guys for hanging out with us for this episode. And be sure to join Mary and I live in Woburn, Mass for her 2-day Present Yourself in Public Speaking Bootcamp, December 9th and 10th. I've included a link in the show notes page for easy access. You can reach out to Mary via her website at magneticpodium.com. You can also register and reach out to Mary through our show notes page at technology-equality.com/your talent. Thank you once again for joining us for this episode number 74. And until our next episode, when we continue to hear the journey, find the pain, and create solutions, enjoy the week.